This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a quick run through the market. So both indices at the JSE fell today, down about 1/10 and 0.2% respectively on the top 40 and the all-share. Metal miners hit particularly hard, with the precious metals and mining index down around 5%, levels that we last saw in November 2020. Now, the rand is a bit of a contributing factor to that. It does continue to strengthen, as you'll see later on in the hour, to its strongest level in 4 weeks. In Nigeria, Stanbic, UBA, Flour Mills of Nigeria and Dangote Sugar all drag the main index of there much lower. Here's what's coming up tonight. The coup in Guinea has sparked an increase in global prices of aluminium. Agriculture experts and investors converge in Kenya and virtually for the annual AGRF summit. And members of the Brics bloc agree on a joint approach to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. All that and more is in the pipeline for you tonight. But let's start the hour with aluminium. Prices of that industrial metal have climbed to the highest in more than a decade. And this comes as political unrest in Guinea fueled concerns over the supply of bauxite. That's the feedstock, the ore, if you will, that's used to make alumina, which is then further processed down the line into aluminium. Guinea accounts for more than half of all Chinese imports of that ore. A unit of the military seized power, suspended the constitution, with the head of the special forces, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, urging the army to back him. That in turn did rattle global aluminium markets on Monday. Prices in London notched a fresh 10-year high. Futures in China climbed to the highest level since 2006. On to Ethiopia now. Policymakers over there are aiming at lowering inflation and eliminating distortions in the foreign exchange market. The Horn of Africa nation, whose troops are engaged in a conflict against Tigrayan rebels in the north, raised cash reserve requirements for banks and increased short-term borrowing rates for commercial banks too. Annual inflation stood at 26.4% in July. It's gone up even further to over 30% in the month of August. The rate has been above or close to 20% for most of the year, defying government efforts to curb it. The government is also streamlining the foreign exchange market, where the difference between the official exchange rate and that in the parallel market has widened this year for various reasons, including the war in the north. The local currency, the birr, is now trading at around 60 to the dollar on the parallel market. Compare that to around 45 to the dollar on the official FX market. Let's bring you up to speed with developments on this story. Coletta Anjohi joins us now from the Ethiopian capital tonight with more data on this. So, Coletta, headline inflation has been over 20% for all of 2021. What's driving it to those levels?
Well, the government says that partly to blame is COVID-19, where we saw in the past year the government introducing some stimulus into the economy to encourage production, to encourage people to really have a normal life in terms of getting goods and services. So that was kind of an impact to it. But over the time, we know that from around November last year to now, we've had internal challenges in terms of security, peace and security, and this is really eating up in terms of government direction of resources and all that. We are seeing the government redirecting some resources into offering humanitarian assistance, as well as ensuring that peace and security, especially in areas like the north, is stabilized. So that kind of has an impact in terms of the inflationary issues. And we've seen the government saying that, for example, in just this past month, it spent about $190 million in terms of ensuring that humanitarian effects, as well as other assistance and related issues are concerned, are given to conflict areas like in the north. So all these, especially, and peace and security is being underlined, especially as one of the biggest factors that is kind of making the inflation rates to kind of be wobbly.
So the National Bank of Ethiopia also recently ordered commercial banks to not issue any loans backed by collateral, particularly physical assets like buildings or land. Is that order in place, but also can individuals or companies get unsecured loans, or has that also been frozen?
Yes, the order is still in place, and the government has insisted that people should note that it is a temporary measure, and more of it more aligned to what is happening in terms of peace and security, especially with the northern region. And the government, we've seen it saying that these measures are being carried out in great cooperation with the security agencies. So it is a temporary measure. Of course, it will bite the everyday man, if I would use those words, people who are not targeted by this. It has nothing much to do with the market issue. I mean, these directives, it's more of a peace and security issues and ensuring that what the government has called economic sabotage does not happen by individuals that it is targeting. So yes, the everyday man who would love a loan to probably do a business here and there, who had planned for it, might have to postpone it until the government feels that it is safe to open up to loans and all that. But we've also seen the National Bank introducing new measures. I mean, from 1st of September, commercial banks will be expected to increase their reserve requirement from 5% to 10%, and also the commercial banks will also be expected to transfer at least 50% of forex exchange holdings, and all these expected to gear towards what the government is saying is a targeted approach to ensure that economic sabotage does not happen.
Indeed, trying to very aggressively reduce the amount of money in circulation. One last question for you. So the birr has lost around 20% of its value against American dollar just this year alone, and it's trading at a premium on the parallel market. But beyond what we've discussed, are there other measures being considered to try and close that gap between the parallel and the official market rates for the birr against the dollar?
Well, according to the Minister of Finance, they say that we've seen it employing what it calls shock absorbers or shock measures to ensure that there's that short-term stabilization of the forex forex issue. But it says now what it is embarking on is a long-term permanent solution to this challenge, and it says this will ensure that it kind of nibs the problem from the root causes, and it's going for the long term. It says it will cost the economy a bit, but it's willing to go that way in a bit to really ensure that the currency becomes a bit stable. And it says one of the issues it will do is ensure that there will be a smooth transition to ease the forex supply and also create a buffer in terms of forex buffers, and this may be through export receipts and all that. Then in the long run, it wants to encourage more exports, because so far exports have been growing according to the government. So it wants to encourage industries to ensure that those that are export oriented really do well, and so the country can be able to earn more in the long term. And also what we are having now, we've seen the government launching a campaign that it calls against illicit financial transfer, and it is encouraging citizens to ensure that for those who have relatives in the diaspora or want to get any money from abroad, then they should do that through the legal means, which would be the different companies that have been identified internationally for forex or foreign exchange or foreign transfer.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Colette Anjohi live there in Addis Ababa. And we're still in Ethiopia. Ethiopian Airlines, Africa's largest carrier by many metrics, is planning to resume flight with a Boeing 737 MAX jet by early 2022. This comes after it reached an out-of-court settlement with the US plane maker, Boeing, over a deadly crash that took place in March 2019. Africa's largest and most profitable airliner says it's now convinced beyond reasonable doubt that the model is safe after a range of modifications were made to it. Here's Girum Chala with the latest from Addis.
In March 2019, 157 people were killed after an Ethiopian Airlines Boeing 737 MAX plane crashed a few minutes after taking off from the Bole International Airport. The reason for the nosedive of the brand new aircraft was majorly blamed on the faulty software. That tragic story then led to the grounding of almost all of the MAX aircraft across the world. Ethiopian Airlines is Africa's largest and one of the most reliable aviation industry operator, and has been parking these multi-million-dollar planes over the past 2.5 years. But now ET says it's confident the embattled Boeing planes are airworthy and could return to a normal flying schedule as early as January 2022. Already, a number of countries have lifted a ban for the aircraft to resume flying. Sources at the Ethiopian Airlines said its engineers have been in close collaborative work with Boeing counterparts and finding a permanent solution to the 737 MAX plane safety concerns. Many still say ET must go the extra mile to build customer confidence when it comes to using the planes for passenger services once they return to the skies. CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
And you'll hear a bit more about the 737 MAX before the hour is out. On to Egypt now, though. The country's economy expanded by over 7% in the fourth quarter of the 2020-2021 fiscal year, at quite the improvement compared to the contraction of nearly 2% recorded in the same period last year. CGTN's Yasser Hakim now takes a look at how the North African country managed to achieve that growth number and the plans going forward.
The 7.7% economic growth for March to June 2021 has exceeded government expectations of 5%. It shows a strong rebound from the 1.7% contraction recorded in the same period of 2020. Experts say this is due to successful policies implemented during the coronavirus pandemic.
It was a balanced policy praised by international institutions such as the IMF. It was based on preventing a total lockdown of the economy like some countries did in the region, and thus supporting the continuation of economic activity and production. Other steps relate to the strict anti-COVID measures and the vaccination process, allowing living conditions and the economy return to near normal levels.
Some sectors saw positive growth during the pandemic year, like telecommunications and IT. But industries that saw a sharp slowdown after the coronavirus outbreak, like tourism, aviation, construction and manufacturing, received and still receive constant financial assistance from the central bank.
The government also focuses on supporting the sectors that contribute to economic growth like trade, retail and consumer-related sectors, and they have seen a 15% growth. This was fostered by the expansionist policy by the central bank, stimulating the market and creating a strong purchasing power within the family segment during the crisis. Going forward, the government will continue to focus on these sectors that account for 47% of the national income.
Experts say the government has to deal with two major challenges that prevent faster growth rates. First is the very high annual population increase of 2.6% that consumes a significant chunk of state revenue. Secondly, there's an urgent need to speed up the vaccination process to allow the country to return to normalcy, and through that allows the full resumption of most economic activities. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
All right, then a quick run through some company headlines. Let's start on the world of banking. The Bank of Kigali has reported net earnings for the 6 months ending in June up 41% on the back of increased interest and non-interest income. The bank is listed in the stock markets in Nairobi and Rwanda, Kigali to be specific. It reported $22.7 million in net earnings in the review period, up from $16.3 million in the preceding similar period. Now, that net earnings growth does signal a recovery for the publicly traded Rwandan lender, and it mirrors the trend that has been seen by other lenders in Kenya as economic activity picks up from COVID-19 disruptions. South Africa's RCL Foods has seen a rebound in its performance, but its chicken business is still a challenge. In its annual results for the year ending in June 2021, the company reported that its earnings had gone up by 47% to over $175 million. Revenue was up 14% to $168.4 million, but its headline earnings are up by over 700% to $67.2 million. By midday on Monday, share price had rallied by more than 12% to around 11 rand. Iraq's government and Total Energy have agreed on a $27 billion package of investment deals aimed at boosting oil and gas output and reducing power outages in the oil cartel OPEC's second largest producer. The French energy company will invest around $10 billion in projects over 7 years. Iraq's oil minister Ihsan Abdul Jabbar said at a ceremony in Baghdad. Work on the projects will start in southern Iraq by the end of the year. And finally, Singapore has lifted the flight ban on the Boeing 737 MAX, effectively allowing it to get back into the skies after more than 2 years after the plane was grounded in March 2019, following 2 fatal crashes that collectively killed 346 people. The approval for the plane's return comes months after it returned to service in the United States and in Europe, and it follows the more recent lifting of grounding orders in other markets like India, Japan, Fiji, Australia and Malaysia. That's a run through your company headlines. We're 15 minutes into the hour. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. Agriculture experts and investors converge in Kenya and virtually for the annual AGRF Summit. And Tanzania has suspended an increase in petrol prices, which was announced last week. Why and what happens next? The details coming up shortly.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head out now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. The Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa is set to hold a forum this week on how the continent's agricultural systems can be improved for better yields, better incomes, better outputs. Kenya is hosting the 4-day summit set to take place from the 7th to the 10th of September. This year's event is expected to have at least 500 in-person participants and another 10,000 individuals joining virtually from more than 150 countries. Together, they will be exploring a recovery path for the continent's food systems, especially out of the ongoing pandemic, and to build its resilience to future shocks. The COVID-19 pandemic has not only exacerbated an already fragile food security problem across the continent, but it's also added yet another complex layer to other food security threats like climate change and economic slowdowns and downturns. Onto the continent's youngest state, South Sudan says it will use the $334 million that's been allocated to it in SDRs from the International Monetary Fund to build its FX reserves, which have been depleted due to a 6-year civil war. South Sudan's economy has also been hit quite hard by the double blow of the COVID-19 pandemic on one hand, but also a decline in oil prices last year. Inflation is also a significant problem. Patrick Oyet ties it all together.
The Bank of South Sudan says the $334 million will boost the country's foreign exchange reserves. The bank says the money from the International Monetary Fund will also help mitigate economic challenges caused by COVID-19 pandemic. The money is part of an allocation by the IMF to support countries that are most affected by the effects of COVID-19. But South Sudan's economy is also suffering from the effects of long years of civil war.
The new resources that the IMF have allocated to South Sudan have come when South Sudan is implementing essential economic reforms, including monetary and far-reaching exchange rate reform.
For 2 months, civil servants have gone without salaries. Some Juba residents are reacting to the arrival of the money from the International Monetary Fund in the country.
The money does not reach the right people. The ordinary traders who need this money to import basic goods don't get the money. So the central bank needs to find a way of how this money can reach the ordinary traders that focus on basic commodities.
There was 174 million given in April, but we have not seen this money going to the peace agreement. But this time, I am feeling and I am requesting if the government could pay attention and prioritize to the issues of the peace agreement.
South Sudan's government says it is working to resolve the salary irregularity.
One is the decision, the recommendation of the economic cluster to the Council of Ministers on ways and means of empowering and reforming the Ministry of Finance. Two, way of capacitating and reforming the Bank of South Sudan. And then a recommendation on a new salary structure.
South Sudan Central Bank says the economy is likely to stabilize soon because in addition to the IMF's money, there is now a significant recovery of oil prices. However, some economic experts say stabilizing the country's economy will still take time because of the ongoing flooding across the country. The flooding is washing away crops, livestock, and displacing people. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Tanzania has suspended increases in petroleum product prices announced just last week. Instead, the East African nation is now setting up a team, it says, to investigate the economic factors that are driving fuel prices much higher. The changes in price were announced on the 2nd of September. They were attributed to world oil market prices. Remember, crude prices are up by over 40% so far this year. According to the Bank of Tanzania's monthly review for August, domestic pump prices of petroleum products in Tanzania have risen moderately since June 2020. The BOT report added that this trend was partly fueled by increased demand associated with the recovery of the global economy. Now then on to Zimbabwe. The country has licensed 57 foreign and local entities to grow medical marijuana in the Southern African nation. According to Zimbabwe's Investment and Development Agency, the investors are from Germany, Switzerland, Canada, and there's some local players as well. Collectively, they've been licensed for the cultivation and processing of marijuana for medical use, and they will own 100% of the businesses they set up. Zimbabwe is Africa's largest single tobacco producer, but authorities expect marijuana export earnings to start gradually replacing tobacco as farmers transition, looking for higher earnings from that crop. The government has legalized medical marijuana production back in 2018, but exports are yet to start. According to Zimbabwe's treasury, sales of cannabis are forecast to reach $1.25 billion this year. Over 200 million kilograms of tobacco worth nearly $600 million have been sold during the marketing season that is now coming to a close in Zimbabwe. From Harare, here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya.
14.3% more tobacco has been delivered this year compared to 2020. The value of the crop is 27.72% higher than the $457 million realized last year, with prices firmer by 12%.
We have surpassed our target. Our target initially was 200 million, but as you can see, we are now actually at 208, and we might end up at around 212 million kilograms.
While that's a welcome growth at a macro level, there are concerns that the majority of small-scale farmers are getting the short end of the stick due to onerous repayment obligations.
These guys don't have cash. They don't have access to long-term capital, so they get contractors to actually, give them the inputs, right? And then the contractors really decide how much they pay these guys, right? So despite the increase in volumes, the amount of cash that actually goes to the growers is very little.
Authorities are taking steps to address this.
I cannot tell you that for this season, the government has unveiled a $60 million facility in a bid to try to localize funding of production, and most of our growers will be able to access that money directly from the banks, and we believe it will actually reduce the cost of production and improve the grower viability.
Government has ambitions to grow tobacco into a $5 billion industry, which will involve not just increasing the amount of tobacco that is grown, but also processing it in order to enhance its value.
We need to minimize foreign money coming into the country and buying raw goods. Rather, let that foreign money come and buy finished goods.
A crop of 250 million kilograms has been projected for the 2022 season. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
A survey shown that South Africa's consumer confidence went up slightly in the third quarter compared to the 3 months prior, helped by pent-up demand for big-ticket purchases like cars and electronic appliances. especially as more and more South Africans are getting vaccinated. Now, the Consumer Confidence Index went up to minus 10 points compared to minus 13 in the second quarter of the year. Riots, as you might recall, did break out in July, leading to the damage of hundreds of businesses, causing billions and billions of rand in losses. And these came after the former president, Jacob Zuma, handed himself in to start a 15-month jail term for contempt of court. The rollout of COVID-19 vaccines has bolstered confidence levels, according to this survey, with government support for its employees and an uptick in dividend payments also countering the impact of this civil unrest. Into East Africa now. The tourism industry in Kenya, which is the second largest source of foreign exchange earnings after agriculture, has been hit pretty hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. Businesses that depend on tourist spending, coming into the country and then spending money here, are counting their losses. Craftswomen in Samburu County in northern Kenya are particularly feeling the pinch as they struggle to earn an income. It's estimated that over 60,000 women in that region have been deeply impacted as international tourist arrivals have dried up.
When the COVID-19 pandemic hit Kenya, everything went to a halt. These women used to educate their children with income from the sales of their beadwork. Most of their children are now home and not schooling.
The motive of this setup was to promote the local artists. When the tourist comes, they'll buy our artifacts and actually they'll promote the people at the village. We hope the pandemic will go down and the clients now will have the confidence of traveling.
Ghana's construction industry is starting to rebuild after months of disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The ratings agency Fitch has ranked the sector as the 6th most attractive market in sub-Saharan Africa. But as CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai now reports, real estate developers in Ghana are concerned about a recent hike in the cost of building materials.
Kojo Williams's real estate business took a hit when the COVID-19 pandemic struck last year. Lockdown restrictions forced him to halt all his building projects.
People were not sure about the future because of the pandemic, so everybody wanted to hold on to whatever they had. So all agreements and investment, sources and all of that became pending, because people wanted to know what the pandemic would bring and how it was going to pan out.
With restrictions now eased, Williams says his business is beginning to pick up, but building houses has become more expensive.
The cost of construction materials over the past year or so, the costs have gone up, some going up as high as 40 to 80%. And that has actually thrown a lot of our calculations, and our permutations, out of gear.
According to government data, the real estate industry contributed significantly to Ghana's economic growth at the end of last year, when coronavirus restrictions were eased. Real estate developers say they are having to push up prices due to the rising cost of building materials. This 4-bedroom home was $180,000 before the pandemic hit. It's now on the market for $210,000. Ratings agency Fitch says Ghana's construction industry has grown by 14% this year after contracting by 5% last year. The agency links the growth to political stability and an attractive labor market, but some aren't so sure the sector has completely bounced back.
A lot of projects are being initiated today. We are not seeing, the project, especially when it comes to housing. If you find out how many contracts were signed in the past administration in terms of contract to execute certain housing projects, the numbers are so huge. If you put them together, we might be hitting about 2 million. But have you seen, even 100 of it? So sometimes I'm not too sure where they are picking the data from.
Developers like Kojo Williams hope Ghana's economic recovery from the pandemic will stay on track so he can find buyers for these brand new homes. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
At 18:30 GMT, it's time for another break. Here's what's coming up. Brics member states agree on a joint approach to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. And the US job market is still depressed even as the economy is making a steady rebound. We'll explore that contradiction next.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. The leader of the Special Army Unit that ousted President Alpha Condé from power has barred Guinean government officials from leaving the country until further notice. Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, a former French Legionnaire officer, made that announcement during a gathering that brought together senior government officials, including some of Condé's ministers. He also said that a government of national unity will be set up in the weeks to come. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, at least 30 people were killed over the weekend in an attack in the northeastern end of the country. According to local and United Nations reports, the jihadists, or the Allied Democratic Forces, also known as the ADF, are suspected to have carried out the attack in the Ituri area. The ADF is considered to be the deadliest among scores of armed militia groups that tend to roam the mineral-rich eastern end of the DRC. The former Tunisian presidential candidate Nabil Karoui is still being detained in Algeria after court there ordered his arrest. He's accused of illegally crossing over the country's border. Karoui was placed into custody alongside his brother Ghazi. Nabil Karoui is the owner of the Nesma television channel. He was the head of the Heart of Tunisia political party. That is the second largest in Tunisia's parliament. And finally, South Africa's former president Jacob Zuma has been released from prison on medical parole. Mr. Zuma was jailed in July after being found guilty of contempt of court because he failed to comply with an order of the Constitutional Court. The 79-year-old was then sentenced to 15 months behind bars. That's a run through your headlines. China's Commerce Ministry has gone over the achievements made at the most recent Brics Economic and Trade Ministers meeting that was held virtually on the 3rd of September. Wang Hui takes a closer look.
The Brics countries include Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Their population makes up 42% of the world's total, and their total combined GDP is 24% of the world's GDP. With the ongoing pandemic and uncertain times for the global economy, the BRICS countries' economic and trade ministers reached a joint communique at their 11th meeting, preparing for this year's BRICS summit. According to the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, One major agreement reached by ministers was a commitment to deepening international cooperation in fighting COVID-19.
The ministers have promised to accelerate the production and use of vaccines and to secure vaccine allocation through multilateral regional cooperation. They also have agreed to support the World Trade Organization's proposal to temporarily waive intellectual property rights for vaccines and other medical devices.
Chen says the ministers have also released a statement formally supporting the multilateral trading system, opposing unilateral protectionism. They also support the necessary reform of the WTO and look forward to positive results from the WTO's 12th ministerial meeting in November. The ministers have also reached a series of agreements to deepen pragmatic cooperation in trade and commerce.
The ministers have promised to cooperate in WTO reforms, global supply chains, small and medium-sized enterprises, and international investment. They've also decided to seize the opportunities in digital economy and green development.
Chen says the BRICS countries have large markets, abundant resources, and great potential. He adds, amid the pandemic, these countries have shown their resiliency and vitality. They have injected an important dynamic in the struggle against the virus and the push for economic recovery. Wang Hui, CGTN, Beijing.
China's top financial regulators have reiterated their intent to further open up the country's financial market. Officials from the People's Bank of China, that's the country's central bank, the securities market, the banking and insurance regulators, they all spoke at the ongoing China International Fair for Trade and Services. And they said that foreign capital will be encouraged to continue participating in the domestic financial market. Steps, they say, will also be taken for cooperation among domestic and foreign financial institutions to improve risk control and financial management. Many new technologies that can boost work efficiency are being showcased at the Digital Services Trade Pavilion of the China International Fair for Trade and Services this year. The robot arm from Deloitte is among them.
This is the Xiaoqingren, a robot arm developed by Deloitte, a global provider of audit, tax, and consulting services. Moving up and down, this little arm can organize over 10,000 invoices in under 10 hours without any manual help. Preloaded with customized software, the arm can generate billing lists after it receives orders. It will fill out the forms and print them out, and then organize them into different segments based on the images and signals received from the software. The arm is now in its 3.0 version after undergoing updates in the last 3 years. Colin Jing, managing partner for the audit and assurance innovation at Deloitte China, says that these robots enable companies to utilize their skilled manpower for creative purposes, while the basic level tasks are performed by the machine.
One of our current expectations is that operational finance, such as accounting, computation, and tax declaration, will be replaced by robots gradually. So far, our first batch of clients, such as some fast-moving consumer goods companies, can achieve 80% of automation in these types of works already. In the future, more people can be released from these repetitive works and be utilized for specialized finance tasks.
In addition to giving a helping hand to financial companies, Xiaoqingren can also be used in other business operations and office scenarios such as manufacturing and service industries. Colin Jing says that at an opportune time, the robotic arm will be integrated with more artificial intelligent elements so that it can perform more smart tasks.
We will gradually add more functions to the robot, such as listening, speaking, computing, reading, and writing. It can be equipped with more sensory capabilities and with a brain to help us analyze situations that may need prior expert intervention, such as helping the banking department better judge and predict the risk of corporate defaults.
Global consultancy Grandview Research says in a report that the global robotic process automation, or RPA, market value was $1.6 billion by the end of last year. The market is expected to see a growth rate of over 30% every year to 2028. Analysts expect the pandemic-induced work-from-home situation to give the sector a further boost. Zhuzhu, CGTN, Beijing.
The US Labour Department says job creation for the month of August was a pretty big disappointment, with the economy just adding some 235,000 new positions. August total is the worst since January, and it comes with heightened fears of the pandemic and the impact that rising numbers of COVID-19 cases could have on what so far has been a relatively robust recovery. On Fairclough has the details from Washington.
The US economy is expanding so fast after COVID's devastating blow, it's been in danger of overheating. And supermarket giant Walmart needs to fill 20,000 positions so badly, it's offering $20 an hour, way over the minimum wage, as well as throwing in college tuition fees to lure applicants. So why are the latest numbers so flat? The economy adding just 235,000 jobs in August, when forecasts thought it would be around triple that.
The numbers can seem confusing. The US is quickly returning to what's called full employment. Unemployment has dropped again to a healthy 5.2%. But full employment doesn't mean that everyone has a job. And with the Delta variant raging across the United States right now, there's a whole swathe of the population that either can't or won't work because of the ongoing impact of the pandemic.
The US Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, is optimistic that this problem, along with inflation dangers, may now be receding enough to draw those people back into the workforce. And President Biden feels the same.
We're the only developed country in the world whose economy is now bigger than it was before the pandemic. Because of the groundwork we laid with the American Rescue Plan, our vaccination strategy, we're seeing an economy and a job market that can weather the ups and downs of the Delta variant and anything else that comes our way.
But the Fed isn't quite optimistic enough to stop spending $120 billion a month to support the economy, though is expected to start reducing that figure as conditions improve. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Scientists and researchers are continuously searching for ways to create efficient power sources for the increasing number of electronic products that we're working on. Case in point, looking for fusion as a source of power. One group of researchers from the University of San Diego, however, have come up with a rather novel method that literally uses the sweat from your fingertips. CGTN's Mark New has the details.
Harvesting energy to power technology typically has to be done this way. But researchers from the University of California, San Diego have managed to cut the amount of physical activity down dramatically. They've developed a wearable device that can actually produce power while you sleep.
The power harvested from one finger can reach from 20 up to 40 microwatt. Basically, that means that the energy harvested from one night's sleep can power a wristwatch for almost a day. And that's only the energy from one finger.
The invention makes use of something we think little about, the sweat from our fingertips. The device's carbon foam electrodes absorb the sweat. Enzymes trigger a chemical reaction between lactate and oxygen molecules to produce electricity. That raises the question, why not place the device under our armpits?
We think we have more sweat feet, under the armpit, on the forehead, but that's more because that the ventilation is not as well at those places. So the sweat is not easily evaporated as well as from say the more exposed places like your hand. Basically, the sweat coming off of the fingertip leaves fingerprints. And actually, this is a result of evolution that our finger have more sweat glands. So basically, it generates more fuel compared to other locations on the body.
I asked the researchers whether their device could actually power a cell phone. They said no, that still requires too much power. But there are other ways of generating more power that are as simple as tapping your fingers.
The pressing motion of the finger can introduce extra convection, which would instantaneously increase the power output of the device, almost twice as much energy from the pressing. Our team have been trying to put it on a finger while just doing desk work, typing and clicking mouse, or just playing with their cell phones. And the device can continuously operate regardless.
The immediate goal is to power wearable sensors. But Lou says the grand vision is to do what wind and solar have done, create a self-powered renewable system, though this one would work just by breaking a sweat. Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
Educators across Africa are grappling with the hardships of the COVID-19 pandemic as they continue to learn how to engage with their students best. Now that includes a boost in interest in science, tech, engineering and math programs, or STEM education if you prefer. Tonight, CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy takes up the story of a mother of two who's training the next generation of Ugandan coders amidst the country's strict school shutdown.
So can you go through this?
This is not your typical classroom. 3 times a week, these students gather in their teacher's garden in Uganda's capital, Kampala, to learn how to code.
I do coding because I want to be a white hat hacker and be able to stop or block the black hat hackers.
With my passion in aviation and climate change, I hope that one day I'll be able to discover biofuels which planes can use instead of fossil fuels which damage the environment.
Shamim Mwanaisha is the founder of Supersonic Aviators. Mwanaisha started the club just before the COVID-19 lockdown forced schools to shut down.
The system works in the way that we recruit children and we introduce them to STEM education using coding, space, aviation, and climate change. In coding, we learn different languages. For example, we learn HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. I also teach them to use codes so that they be able to command the computer to do different tasks.
The mother of 2 was inspired to take up coding 3 years ago when her 7-year-old son expressed an interest. The club mainly caters to girls and underprivileged children, teaching them everything from coding, aviation to astronomy amid Uganda's strict COVID-19 shutdown.
We do flight experiences, we do camp aviation, we assemble aircrafts, they watch movies about space to motivate them, they took presentations. This has enabled them to be creative, critical thinkers, and also problem solvers.
Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni imposed a total lockdown in March 2020 that saw all education institutions closed immediately. The decision sent home 15.1 million school-going children at all levels, and for the majority, the status quo has remained for public schools. 18 months later, with the pre-primary pupils and those in primary 1 to 3 having not had any form of learning during that period.
All right, then let's run through the commodity prices that we're looking at the moment. So we did speak a little bit about aluminium prices being affected by the coup that we've seen over in Guinea. Rusal, which milled around 4 million tons of bauxite from that country in the first 6 months of 2021. That accounted for about half of the bauxite ore the firm mined in the first half of the year. Now, the firm may consider, may being the key word here, options to get its employees out of the West African state if matters there do escalate. Brent's gone up to $72 a barrel today, started a little lower than that, even as the Delta variant of COVID continues to dent consumer spending. Crude spent the first 6 months of 2021 in a recovery of breathtaking speed, but that recovery has pretty much stalled, at least from the producer's perspective. Prices are hovering in the low $70 a barrel mark. Here's what's coming up next. We'll introduce you to the entrepreneur behind Kenya's first company set up to make USB cables.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines.
No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Let's get back into Kenya. Totosai Holdings is Kenya's first USB cable and charger manufacturing company incorporated in the country. The firm is a brainchild of a 28-year-old innovator, Anthony Muthungu, and he's gotten plaudits for his efforts to spur innovation, create employment and get into the manufacturing space among young people. With a story, here's CGTN's Wilkis Tanyabwa.
What do you do when the USB cable you use to charge your phone or transfer data stops working? You buy another one, of course, and discard the old one. But in Kenya, the problem is often likely to recur after a few months. That dilemma led to the establishment of Totosai, a USB cable manufacturing company. Now we are at the entrance of Kenya's first USB manufacturing company. It's located in this little building about 1.5 hours away from the capital. However, this little operation is sending ripples through the rest of the country. Let's go inside and see what it's about. 6 people working in close quarters make up the Totosai company. Quick, nimble fingers make the work light, and the batches of finished cables pile up in the corner in a routine established when 28-year-old Anthony Muthungu started the company in March 2020.
I needed an USB cable to transfer some files from my phone to my laptop. And all of the cables I had in my house were 6 and none was working.
In a bid to figure out where the problem lay, the trained physics and mathematics teacher secured 5,000 USB cables from his friends and took them apart.
We noted there is a certain common mistake that makes these cables not go more than 3 months or 4 months.
The market had been flooded with substandard USB cables, so he and his friends decided to start making their own. In order to ensure quality, the company imports some raw materials as well as machines from the UK and China. In a day, they can churn out between 300 and 500 cables. It is a new venture, the first of its kind in the country and on the continent. Kenya has 10 million smartphone users, according to global market statistics, meaning there's a ready market for mobile phone and laptop accessories. The cables cost between $2 and $5 each, almost matching the price of imported ones. In its first 2 weeks of operation, the company sold over 700 cables.
Everyone at my house was fighting to use my new cables. They don't disconnect easily or stop working when you use them.
The lessons learnt here are invaluable. However, high taxes, costly materials and a demanding business environment still continue to pose a challenge. But despite the difficulties, the young innovators are determined to soldier on, to share their lessons and products with the rest of the continent, and to build on what they have started.
By the start of year 2023, God willing, you have started manufacturing earphones in the next room. By the start of 2025, you have started now assembling mobile phones.
There are hundreds of USB cables here ready to go out into the market. And it's not just about being the first to do it. This company is now blazing a trail for other African innovators to follow. Wilkis Tanyabwa, CGTN in Kirinyaga, Kenya.
One last story for you. This one's out of Somalia. Relative stability over there is attracting Somalis from the diaspora to help in rebuilding their country. Now, while the economic environment is not as conducive as it'd like, they certainly say it's better than what it was earlier. CGTN's Daniela Pearson looks at one returnee who's reaping from his decision to set up shop in the seaside capital of Mogadishu.
A notable number of the Somali diaspora community are gearing up to return home following decades of violence and instability in their home country. Mohammed Bashir is one of them. After being forced to leave Mogadishu, he is embarking on his return with an aim of inspiring reforms in Somalia.
If I may paint you a picture of the situation when I fled, the country was in total chaos. We faced political instability and insecurity. It was impossible to work and people hardly slept in their homes. Students were forced to stay home and there was fierce fighting going on. There was fighting on many fronts. You were left with only two options. You either fled from the country or were forced into displacement, particularly from Mogadishu.
Bashir sought refuge in the Netherlands. There, he found the opportunity to learn and develop his skills.
It was possible for me to adapt to the new country, its people and culture. I've learned the language and socialized with people. All these were possible because of my young age. I immediately started pursuing my dream and have got the opportunity to continue with my education. I have learnt graphic design.
Conditions in Somalia have slowly returned to normal, aided by the African Union mission in Somalia and the Somali security forces. This kind of change is inspiring those living in the diaspora to return and help in rebuilding their country.
The first thing I had to think about was what I could contribute. So I thought the first thing I could do was serve people with my education and also find an income for myself through it. That was my objective. We started a family business from a simple idea. We started Daos Advertising Agency. When I returned in 2012, many businessmen had to go far for the design of a business card, brochure or a profile. They had to go to Nairobi or Dubai. What I started with a small room is today a big company with over 30 direct employees. It's not only an advertising agency now. Last year, we also introduced printing.
Analysts say the diaspora contribution to the country has been immensely significant. However, there are still some challenges that hinder the chances of full-scale investment in Somalia.
The biggest challenges that hinder diaspora investment is the lack of certainty in the political future of the country. Since there is political instability, conflicts may arise anytime which can cause damage to their property. There is also lack of a proper insurance system that prevents huge investment into the country. There is no guarantee of any return if your property is damaged or you lose your wealth to fire or it sinks in the sea. The other is insecurity in the country. Somalia is not fully secure at the moment.
For returnees like Bashir, they hope to rebuild and develop their communities with the aim of spurring economic growth. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Quick run through the currencies as we wrap up the program. So the Kenyan shilling is our focus. It's finally crossed over the 110 to the dollar threshold in the interbank market. 110.05, I believe, is a fresh all-time low for the local unit. And that's going back all the way to January 1st, 2003, according to Bloomberg data. So Ghana's cedi and the South African rand, they're clawing back some of the losses they posted against the dollar. The cedi is back under 6 to the dollar, but only just. The rand, on the other hand, that's having an interesting streak. It's clawed back nearly 4% in the last 4 weeks. That's where we leave it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. Many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.